Appreciate everybody coming out tonight. It feels like I haven't been here in months, and which is kind of true. So I'm happy to be back. Happy to see so many faces here. And yeah, let's kick things off with a little bit of housekeeping here. If you don't already know, there are bathrooms just across the hallway, some co-ed bathrooms, and then there's also some gender-specific restrooms around the bank of elevators. Hopefully you've already gotten some food. There's plenty of salad left here, and some beverages on the end. And this wouldn't be possible, as many of you know, without the help of our sponsors. And we're really thrilled to have Workday sponsoring us again. In fact, well, I remember I have a little blurb here that Will wanted us to read. If I can dig it up. Just one moment. Sorry, guys. Unless anybody else has it handy. Yeah, so Will just wanted me to mention that Workday, I believe you guys just opened a new office in Boulder, is that right? And sounds like you've been hitting all the conferences lately. JSConf, I heard there were some people at, as well as React Rally this week. Will Klein, actually, who's normally here, he's giving a talk at React Rally on Friday, so there's also going to be some Workday folks there. But I don't see a note here about hiring, but he does say they're growing at a healthy clip. So I would recommend checking out Workday. Will says nothing but great things about it, and we're super happy to have them sponsoring us. So as usual, we also want to thank Turing and Salt for helping to fund the meetup here and keep this thing moving along. In addition to that, we also fund a huge part of the meetup through Open Collective. It's sort of where we manage all of our expense tracking and how we pay out volunteers for the expenses that they take on. So if you'd like to check us out on Open Collective, we welcome donations there and would really appreciate your support. Thanks to everybody, as you can see here, who has already donated. And I see we already have a few postings up here on the board, but wanted to give the stage to anybody who wanted to talk about a posting or maybe didn't get a chance to write theirs up here. Do we have anybody who's hiring that wants to say a few words about their business or the roles? Yeah, come on down. And sure, I'll bring it to you. Yep.
I'm a log guy, so I can handle it. Hi, my name is Clayton Weller. I work at Hotel Engine. I've been there about 6 months, and I really like it. We're just about to get like $15 million in investments, so we're going to be ramping up. Need a lot of devs. We do Node and Ruby on the back end. We're moving from legacy software, so if you want to help us with that, we want it. And then on the front end, we do React. So really excited. Another thing, we're also teaming up with Worldwide Technology to do a hackathon in October. So if you're interested in either Hotel Engine or just making some shit, come talk to me after the thing. All right.
Hi, my name is Aaron Holderman. I work over at Pi Insurance. We're up on Blake and 18th, pretty close to here. We have a C# backend with a TypeScript React front end, and we are hiring as many people as we can get. I'll put my contact info up on the board after we break.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm the poor handwriting there on the bottom, so I apologize. It looks like chicken scratch. But yeah, so I'm with Shutterstock. We're the leading stock photography. We do video and music as well. We are hiring a mid-level engineer for Node and React. We are also hiring a development manager. So if you have React experience and you want to manage a team, we're looking for that. What's exciting about our team, it's actually my team. We do the platform services for all of Shutterstock, so our product actually supports all of the internal engineers at Shutterstock building the products that they build on React. So it's a pretty exciting project, a really great opportunity to learn, and really challenging stuff. So if you are interested, speak with me and we can see if we can get you on board. Thanks.
Anyone else? Oh, sure.
Hi, I'm Chris. I work at a startup downtown called Ombud. We're an enterprise intelligent content collaboration platform. And we've got a few listings that we're trying to spread the word about. So we are hiring our stacks Node, React. We've got Postgres and a lot of Elasticsearch as well. And we're hiring a full stack engineer, probably working on a lot of like API kind of backend stuff. a QA lead, so someone to kind of manage our entire QA process and best practices there, as well as a QA engineer. I put the contact information of our VP of Engineering, Craig Wu, on the board, so feel free to reach out, or if you want to spread the word that we're looking for these positions, that would be super helpful as well. Thanks so much.
Anyone else? Alrighty. Thanks for that. Moving on here. Do we have any announcements?
I'm Kevin McKernan, one of the other co-organizers. Something Sam and I were talking about as we got here tonight is they're currently putting out tickets for ReactConf in just outside of Vegas in October. It was a lottery that you already had to sign up for, so if you haven't signed up, you can't still sign out, and they're doing those tickets in waves. So if you did sign up, you actually get 2 slots if they send you an email, and so if you are going to go with one of those tickets, but you have an open slot, if you just hit us up on Twitter at the meetup, Twitter, React Denver. I want to go. I'm in the lottery. I'm sure there's other people around that would like a ticket, and if we can just kind of help each other kind of thing if you do get picked in the lottery. So just wanted to throw that out there. Thanks.
I also have an announcement here. Anna from the Flatiron School sent me a message, and it sounds like they have a talk on React hooks tomorrow night. There's a link, an Eventbrite RSVP link that I will tweet out so that if you guys want to check that out tomorrow night, it sounds like a cool event. So, yeah, feel free to check that one out. Do we have any more announcements? Nope. Okay, I do have one question for everybody. If you could please, is anybody going to React Rally this week? Raise your hand if you are. 3 of us, 4 of us maybe. So Will, one of our co-organizers, like I said, he's giving a talk, and he kindly asked us if we could get a group photo for him for his talk. So if you could please bear with us here for a moment. I'm just going to ask everybody kind of squeeze together real quick, and we're just going to take a group photo. So please stand up from your seats. I realize this is a pain. No one wants to do it. And just kind of move into the middle here a little bit so we can get a group photo real quick. Yeah. Oh, it's a good-looking crew. All right. I'm going to get a couple here. All right. On the count of 3, everybody say cheese. 1, 2, 3. All right, one more. Fake out.
Sam's got to get in there.
Yeah. If I can figure out my camera here. I feel left out. 1, 2, 3. Cheese. Thank you. I realize that kind of sucks. Yeah, had we told you guys there would be photos tonight, no one would have shown up. Yeah, there'll be a lot more pizza left, that's for sure. Cool. So with that, we'll move on to the reason you guys are probably all here. We have 2 great speakers tonight, and I'm really happy to welcome Lauren to the stage here. She is a Workday employee herself, so I'm sure she can speak to all the great things I mentioned earlier about Workday. But if you could please give Lauren a round of applause. Bear with us for just a sec here. This one should work. Test. Yep, that's. So you can actually just put it right in here. It's kind of like.
Sorry, one sec. Oh. Sorry. Cool. Oh, this is zoomed out. It's, yeah. The square?
Yeah.
Oh.
So if you want to go in this mode, you'll have to.
Okay.
Sometimes it helps just to go twist your laptop around. Got it?
Yeah. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so I'm here to talk about the usereducer hook and some other hooks. I've been playing around with the idea of not using Redux and like how you can use what's already in React to kind of do your state management. So what I'll be going over, kind of where we're at with Redux, the usereducer hook, and then going on to the use context hook for a richer state management experience. So about me, I'm Lauren Raddatz. I work at Workday. I work with Will. It really is a great place to work. We're like pretty continuously hiring. So if you just like check our website, I think it's like careers.workday.com or something like that. We have mostly front-end roles on there, and it's also in Boulder. It's not in Denver. I've been working there for about a year. I graduated from CU last year. Yeah, and I live here in Denver. It felt weird to put a picture of myself on here, so this is my cat. His name is Benji. Cool. Okay, so some context for where we're at. So many of you probably know Ryan Florence. He's one of the biggest, most public-facing people for React, I would say. In October, he posted this kind of hot take onto Twitter. It's about 10 months ago, so we're nearing this 1 year. So here we are. He kind of likes to really advocate for hooks, obviously, and he describes them as sort of water in the desert for React developers, kind of getting at this point that the use cases for Redux are kind of dwindling as React gets richer. So here he is. So why do we want to move away from Redux? So first of all, there's a pretty large learning curve. It's not really easy to learn. If you Google tutorials, there's probably more tutorials for Redux than there are React. It's complex. Some of the patterns are unintuitive. Some of the concepts can be unfamiliar if you're just getting started with web development, things like actions and reducers, middleware and effects, things like that. Next, similar, there's a lot of boilerplate. There's a lot of things you have to get on the ground before you can actually get running. A lot of like ritualistic code that's not intuitive that you kind of have to find online and copy and paste into your app to get set up with Redux and get your app configured properly. And then we have middleware. So typically, when people use Redux, they tend to use some sort of middleware to help with these side effects to help everything run a bit smoothly, maybe for logging, things like that. But as your app continues to grow, get more complex, like these side effects can become harder to trace. You get weirder bugs, more hard to debug, things like that, harder to follow. So why are hooks important? So hooks kind of exploded because they now allow us to use function components as richly as we could use class components. So this is a big selling point for Redux because you could reference data on your app without like needing to have this whole ritual around like setting up a class component and things like that. You could have these small, light, functional, pure components rendering your components. Yeah. So yeah, kind of awkward. We're in a transition state, I guess. Things are kind of moving more functionally. So when writing React, we can kind of think of our components as functions. We expect them to take in data, output a UI pretty consistently. We kind of want it to look the same, only dependent on the things that we're putting into them. So using components functionally can help ensure immutability in our app and pure and deterministic outcomes with the way people use our UI. So these are kind of, I would say, the most popular hooks right now. If you've used hooks, you're probably pretty familiar with like useState, probably the most common one. There's some that are more intuitive, there are some that are less intuitive. In my experience, usereducer was kind of like this black box. I wasn't really familiar with it. I wasn't sure how to use it. So that's kind of what I want to dive into. It's usereducer. So what is a reducer? So kind of from a purely function or ideologically JavaScript standpoint, it's a function that takes two arguments, the current state and an action, and it just returns the new state based on both of those things that you put into it. So on the right is React's implementation of the usereducer hook. So we take in some sort of function, some state, and an initial state, and then return, we return the current state with a dispatch method. And this dispatch method is kind of like a set state. It allows us to manipulate our state more in an immutable way. So kind of the big selling point of this is that instead of, if you have nested components that aren't direct children, instead of drilling these props, these callbacks down into your components, we can just have this function that we can call to update our state and get these objects out of state without having to drill. We don't have to pass these callbacks around. It's better for performance. And it's just kind of annoying having to pass these callbacks through every level of a component tree. So here's a pretty basic implementation of the usereducer hook. It's based on like React's basic counter example. But so with usereducer, we have this collocated state container within our component. We can initialize a state that we define within this app, all collocated. Using dispatch, we can adjust this state based on like whether someone has clicked a plus or a minus, increasing or decreasing that value. So kind of where we're going with this is like, this is all collocated. This is nice, this is easy, but what if we want to initialize our counter, say, with something, a value from a global store, kind of like how you would use Redux. Instead of having to pass these values around, how do you just dig it out of where you want it? So this brings us to use context. This is React's definition for use context. It accepts a context object, the value returned from React.createContext, and returns the current context value is given by the nearest context provider for the given context. Lots of context. What does that mean? I have no idea. So with use context, we can really actually have a sort of global state within our React component. We can define and reference and update these variables using the use context hook. So context kind of removes the need for us to pass props to components that don't need it. If you're drilling down, if our child isn't a direct descendant, we don't need to prop drill to get the value to it. So left is kind of how you initialize it. So on the bottom, we have our provider component. You can think of it like the top level of your app. Everything that we'll be rendering will be underneath that. It'll be a child or some descendant. So we have this provider. We import usereducer. We create a usereducer function that takes a state and an action, very similar to how Redux works. We use array destructuring to get the state and dispatch object from usereducer, pretty self-explanatory. Then we change the value in the counter context provider to state and dispatch, so we can pass this shared state and dispatch it to the consumers. So an example on the right would be our consumers. Even if they're not within each other, even if they're lower down, we can still get the shared state using context and dispatch objects in the consumer components. So how deep should you go? So hooks are kind of what you make of them. Sometimes you don't need very much. Sometimes you have a pretty larger app that is more complex. You have a lot of branches, a lot of things that need to communicate with each other that aren't really small and collocated. So it can get as complex as you need it to or as simple as you need it to. So this is just kind of an interesting blurb. I went to JSConf with Will last week, and it was in California. And there's this talk that kind of stuck with me. It was about like how frameworks are constantly changing, websites are large and inaccessible, kind of the problems with that, nothing matters, etc. But the less like unnecessary complexity we can add to our apps, like the better it will be for everyone, the people using it, the people that will come onto your team to develop it. But in the end, we aren't going to be using our frameworks forever. So, do I expect you to rewrite your app? No. But if you're starting a new project, maybe it's not huge, maybe it's a little side project, I think you can be a little smarter with using what you have instead of importing all these really clunky libraries, making your bundle larger, making your app less performant when it doesn't need to be. Things like that. Just lots of things to consider. So you can still, sit wherever you want, have your table. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that was Lauren's first meetup talk, so give her another round of applause. That ruled. Very nice. Cool. Let's take maybe just a quick 5-minute break. There's more salad down here, plenty of drinks. If you want to hit the restrooms real quick, we will return here, like I said, probably around 6:40, and then we'll get going with Derik's talk. With that, let's get to our second and final talk. Derik was gracious enough to offer to give a talk here on Storybook, so please welcome him with a round of applause.
Other way. Oh man. Can you hear me? Yeah? Sweet. It's giving me like flashbacks when I was like 17 playing Call of Duty in the basement right now with the mic. Just so I have a better understanding of who my audience is, how many of you all are students? That is a lot. Students, touring, Galvanize, Flatiron School. That is a way less than I was expecting. Okay, cool. So, this talk is on Storybook. So then my second question is, how many of you all have used Storybook before? Excellent. So, I hope to maybe show you something new. If you used it a lot, this might be a lot of recap. So, this is actually the talk I gave at Develop Denver on Friday. That was a longish talk, so I'm hoping to kind of roll through it a little bit. I'm kind of flying blind without my speaker's notes, so the transitions won't be as smooth as they were in my regular talk, but it's going to help me keep it short. So, who am I? I'm Derik Linch. I'm an engineer at CirrusMD. I am a Galvanize grad. I graduated almost 4 years ago. Our stack is Rails, GraphQL, Apollo, and React. So, why am I talking about Storybook? We use Storybook at CirrusMD, and I have used it on front-end development, specifically when we're sort of building new stuff, is I think where Storybook really shines. So this talk is for anyone who's ever felt the pain of developing UI components. I feel you, it can be a huge pain in the ass. And so when I was at Develop Denver, I didn't know who my audience was. I feel, at the React meetup, I think we're all here because we develop in React, right? So, some of the things we're going to cover, the history of Storybook. Normally, I wouldn't spend a lot of time on the history of an open source project, but I actually think this has a unique history, and I think it's actually a really cool example of how open source software can work. I'm going to get a little bit into why I believe Storybook is a useful tool for most organizations, and then I have some code examples. So, what is Storybook? I'm just going to read it straight off of what their docs say. So Storybook is an open source tool for developing UI components in isolation for React, Vue, and Angular. It makes building stunning UIs organized and efficient. Sweet. So the way I read that is just it provides an interface to display your different Vue components. So, I was relying heavily on my notes in this section, so I'm going based off memory. But Storybook actually started as open source software from a small startup. And so they actually had a project where they were doing like monitoring tools for Meteor, and it was a freemium model. And they wrote Storybook in like April of 2016 or something, and it was huge. And it was actually only for React when it first came out. And then it got a lot of traction really quick. People really loved it. And then Kadira actually shut down in 2016. So people were super bummed out. So right at the beginning of 2017 until about May of 2017, there was almost no development on Storybook. So in May of 2017, I guess it was March technically, you can still go to the Storybook repo and find this. So I literally just went to this GitHub page and took a screenshot of it. And so this guy, Nicholas Ors or whatever, he was just, is this project dead? And you can just watch all these comments and people are like, this is super bummed, right? This is a huge bummer. We love Storybook, it's super awesome, like what's going on? So if you guys know who this guy is, he's Dan Abramov. He's one of the co-authors of Create React App and Redux. And he actually chimed in and he was just like, okay, you guys are all complaining about it. Why does anyone want to, step it up and maintain it? So actually a few people did. So this guy, he's the guy who actually wrote the library, finally came back in, and he was basically, this says, my bad, I'm super busy, we're shutting down a business, we're trying to, get the lights shut off. So what's really cool is he was like, I don't have time to work on this anymore, but I'm totally willing to pass this off to the community. And then Dan Abramov wrote a really cool tweet where he was like, this is super dope, this is how open source should totally work, and I totally agree with him. So right around the time they released Storybook 3.0, 3.0 was the first community sort of run version of Storybook, and so they had this really cool blog post where they go into detail about the story and how some of the stuff was going. And so this is sort of a cool little graphic I stole from that blog post that shows the sort of major timelines of Storybook aligned with their Git commit history. And then this is the guy who wrote the blog post, and I thought this was dramatic and has good effect. And so in the past 2 months, Storybook has been reborn from the ashes of a startup and grown into a community-driven collective. And so with Storybook 3.0, we've developed a strong foundation for future releases. Sweet. So, like I said, it has a mildly interesting story. But let's talk more about what it is for us, like what can it provide us. So it is an insanely popular library. I mean, it's used at some of the biggest companies in our business. 40K stars on GitHub, over 3.9 million monthly NPM downloads, has over 700 contributors at this point. In 2018, it was the number 10 most popular JS project, and it's written in TypeScript. So I know this is React, but it can actually basically handle most every major front-end framework that you can imagine. I actually have never even heard of the last two. I've seen them on Reddit or whatever, but I don't even know what they are. So if this list doesn't really cover your UI needs, I would strongly reconsider some of your last choices. So what does Storybook look like? This is where I show you our Storybook. So for some context, CirrusMD is a chat application at its base. It allows you to chat with a doctor, usually in about under a minute. Some doctors are really awesome and they have a 5-second answer rate. Some doctors are less awesome and they're closer to 90 seconds. But at its core, it's a chat application. So our UI components sort of reflect that. So this is what Storybook looks like at its basically, right? So this is one of our components. This is our sort of registration page. This thing can get really complicated. We have a whole white labeling solution that we provide our customers. So they all have slightly different registration pages. And I don't want to get too much into the problem space that we solve, but if you've ever had an insurance card, you have a member number on there. And so all of our different customers all have wildly different member numbers that you use to sort of sign into our application. And our customers give us just literally an Excel file of all of the customers that should have access to our system that we sort of ingest into our platform, and then those numbers are usually wrong. So people are trying to sign into the system and they have their right number from their card and they literally can't sign in because the file they gave us just has them as a totally wrong number. So We have been trying really hard to create these, like, this is an example of like an extensible component that allows us to change these forms. It has complicated rules. And so that is sort of where we use this little, yeah, thank you. Oh, it doesn't scroll though. Not left and right. Will it? Cool. Well, I don't even want to show you that part. I want to show you this part. So this is like this really complicated JSON object that we use to sort of build these forms because all of our customers have sort of different rules, different validations on what those member numbers look like. Sometimes they're 9 digits, sometimes they're 5 letters in 9 digits. We have these sort of regex patterns that we pass through to it. And this is getting mildly ahead of myself because I was going to talk about this component later, but I get super excited about this one because I helped build this one. But this is, you can get a feel for what Storybook is, right? This component is sort of outside the context of our actual application, right? And so I actually can go through and just check out any of our other components that I want to check out. So what does a dependent card in our system look like, right? Stuff like that. So we'll get back to that. Sweet. Now, why is this important? Key takeaway time, I believe that the ultimate value proposition of Storybook is reducing the feedback loop. So I'll get more into why I think these sort of 4 things help with that. But first, I was going to try to explain it in the context of a problem. So the problem is getting to a component that's deeply nested in a user flow in your application. So you can imagine any time you are working on something and it takes you about 8 clicks to get to that component inside of your library, right, inside of your application. That's what I'm really calling out here. It's just I make a change inside my development environment and then I watch Webpacker recompile, and then when it's done, it refreshes my page. I'm maybe back at the login page. We have some HIPAA compliance that log you out pretty aggressively. So sometimes you have to log back in, and then you have to get your app into a certain state. You got to click 5 things to get to this specific part of your application, and that's super duper annoying. So my example of this was I worked on this thing called, we called it the ICD picker. What that is it's super duper boring. They're like insurance billing codes that you have to assign to encounters you have with doctors. So when you get here though, so this is the flow. You have to pick the person you're talking to. Also, we use this cool thing called Faker, which allows you to create fake data. And so one of the things you can use are like Game of Thrones character names, which is super awesome for development environments. I highly suggest you use it. So when you go to like, the flow is you go to complete the encounter that you've had with the patient, because I'm a doctor right now and I'm Halder MD, right? And so when I go to complete it, I end up at this sort of complete encounter flyout. And then normally I didn't set up my development environment. I blew out my database like an hour before this. So we have a config that allows you to have these components. But so right here is where our ICD picker would be sitting. And so you can imagine that when I was building this for the first time, and I'm at a point where I'm not even sure it works or it renders properly, and then I have to get to this, and then I make a change, and then it refreshes the page. I have to click 3 buttons. So yeah, oh no, I'm complaining about clicking 3 buttons, but that's 3 less buttons that I probably should be clicking, right? So in Storybook, I have the ICD picker. It's in here somewhere, yes. So I have this ICD picker here, and I can work on it like in real time. And by the way, if you've ever worked on ICD codes, most of them are super boring, and there's like 70,000 of them. But there's some really fun ones. So there's Jet Engine, and so they're the most bizarre things ever because they have to be able to say like what happened to you, and they get really, really, really specific. And so they come in sort of 3 sizes, and it's the first time you've been sucked into a jet engine, the second time you've been sucked into a jet engine, and then sequela, I believe, just means that this keeps happening to you. So it is 3+. And we have a lot of fun with these. We would all find our favorites. Mine favorite, what is it? It's like crushed by non-venomous snake or a crocodile. There's one with a pig, like a pig rampaged you or something. Bitten by pig. There's one about in-laws. This is just too fun not to share. Yeah, you have problems with your in-laws, and I think most of our favorite is just like, you have a bizarre personal appearance. I do not know who comes up with these. So, anyway, like I said, I think Storybook was the solution, right? Because now I don't have to click through 5 different things to get to my component that I'm looking for, right? So I can kind of skip that whole button clicking, waiting for Webpack. We still have to wait for Webpacker to recompile, right? But the idea is that you take your app out of the context of your application. So that's its benefit. There's also some detriment there because anytime you build anything in a vacuum, you're going to make assumptions and you might get those wrong. So you can assume that you're going to have data structured a certain way being passed to a component, and it might be different what's actually being passed to it inside your application. So while it is its strength, it's also its weakness, like a superhero story or something. So the next one, triggering a specific state in a component to see its edge cases. The one that always comes to mind when I think about this is sort of error cases. You have some sort of component that is hitting some kind of API, whether it's an endpoint in your backend, a third-party API, whatever. And so sometimes those things fail. We usually manage for returned errors from like our GraphQL API, and we also deal with like 500s, right? Those two things have different states. So we can do something more specific with like GraphQL errors and say like, you try to create an object, that thing needs a first name for that doctor or whatever you're trying to create. You screwed it up. Versus like, whoa, that's a 500, someone's, kicking rocks back there. So, Storybook, I think, is also awesome at this. And you can do this with what's called knobs. And so knobs is an add-on. And what's insane to me is that knobs isn't like in every single Storybook instance ever, because I don't really see a use case for this without knobs. But what a knob looks like. So these things are called knobs. So this is our button component, and so we're trying to be super dry, and we have like a single button component, but that button has a lot of different state assigned to it. So that button could be in an error state if it's like a submit button and you failed some kind of form. It's saving, anything you can think of has different colors associated to it. So with our knobs, we can really easily put it into this state. So these knobs really just affect sort of props being passed to the component, so you can really easily tell it like, oh, it has an error state, or it's supposed to be green, or whatever, right? And now you can test that, cool, if this knob is correctly passing like a class name through as like this color modifier to your component, it's turning green like it's supposed to, right? So you can imagine, like I said, what I've done before we were using this was like, trying to fake like error states on forms, and I would like go into the backend endpoint and then write code that's just like throw error to cause a 500, which is super annoying. I got to go find that backend endpoint. Why even care about the context of the backend if you're trying to write for the front end, right? And then God forbid if anyone's ever done that and then committed it and then tried to do a PR and people are like, what are you doing, right? You're destroying our endpoints. So, like I said, this helps you get your components into funky states that are difficult to sort of fake in your actual application, because you're writing code or you're skipping lines or commenting stuff out, and gross. Sweet. So yeah, like I said, I called this mocking obnoxious component states. So documentation. In the essence of keeping this a little bit shorter, I won't get super into this. You can use this in a lot of different ways to document things. And so I was a little loose when I said the term documentation has several different meanings from what I'm going to say. So documentation, that sort of complicated JSON object I was telling you about in the form, we use that as sort of a way to pass off configuration to our less than technical team members. So basically when we're onboarding a new customer and they have a new little form and they have a new regex rule for what that member number pattern is going to be, we have a technical implementation guy, and he's not as technical as like the developers, but he definitely knows a little bit of regex, so he's able to then use this tool to help build out our new forms, and all we have to do is take that JSON config that he sort of spent time tinkering with and finding the perfect version of it, and then we just put it into our system, right? The other thing is that we could take all the different various forms and have them as stories, and then you can look back and be like, oh crap, that's just like UHC where there's like 2 fields and we can cat the 2 fields and slam them together and then send that up. So you can go look at the other forms that we've used without having to like go into the code or go into our managed system, and it's all just kind of lives here as like a documentation, right? If you're a big company, you can see how maybe you have a component library and you can share that amongst all of your different projects, right? So a common UI to share between different code bases, right? So this can be used for new developers looking at what are the tools that I have available in my tool chest, right? So you get a story that's, if anyone's ever gotten a story that says, oh, that drop down that's in this part of the app for doctors, now it needs to be over here in patients. And so you're brand new, you've never seen this thing before, so you're like, I don't know what this thing does, I don't know what it accepts. So a story is sort of this documentation, right? So if you've done a good job of breaking out all the different things that a component can do, it is the documentation of that component, so that it's really easy to go in and see like, oh, I need a red button. Now I know exactly how to build a red button. And so I'll show you what stories actually look like in code, but it's self-documenting. Sweet. Yeah, I already went through all these. Cool. Oh, yeah, this last one. So you can build a Storybook environment. So I have them both up just to show you that it's true. So this is what I've been using was our official storybook.cirrusmd.com. We have this behind a G Suite login, so you can't all go play with our components. But we'll often, specifically when we're building really new things that maybe are even a little nebulous as to what the acceptance criteria for delivering this type of component experience would be, we'll put them up here and have our PMs play with stuff before we spend a bunch of time hooking things up, because if we've made any egregious assumptions about how this component should behave or look or whatever, we can kind of catch them here before we spend a bunch of time actually hooking them up. And you'd be surprised, especially like we just had one with like transitions and how things were transitioning, and they were showing little like messages that was like, yeah, you clicked the button, good job, woo, right? And then there were so many questions we had, we were developers and we're just like, but like, does it show this first and then it goes woo? Or like, what order does this go? And so this will allow to really, to close the feedbacks loop with our PMs. Sweet. So the last thing I was gonna go through was the add-ons ecosystem. I'll make this one a little quick too. It's mostly just like, here's the thing, it's cool, check it out. So, I'll show you the add-ons page. They have a bunch of official add-ons. When you click these, they basically just go to like the GitHub repo for each of these sort of add-ons. I have a few that I was going to call out specifically. Like I said, knobs are the super duper powerful one that really help you build this story. So the whole point of Storybook is you have these stories, right? And so a story is like a component in a specific state, right? And so those knobs help you get to that story. You can use these source code ones. That's probably more useful if you've ever actually seen like a UI library. So you can actually like, oh, what's the code example for how I got this little example to do its thing? We just did notes. So notes allows you to add like markdown to any component you want. So if it's not super obvious, like what the context behind this component is, you can just start writing real documentation behind it. We use story shots. So story shots take a literal snapshot of the rendered story component, and so it's literally just like a string of HTML and JavaScript and CSS, and what that helps you do is regression testing. So you'll have like story shot tests, and so they'll literally like take a snapshot of a code and compare that to the old snapshot and be like, oh, they're different. Did you mean to do that? Like, is the code changed? The CSS is different. I don't think I've ever once had a story shot be like, oh my God, story shot, I didn't mean to do that, thank you. It's almost always like, cool, thanks story shot, I know. Yeah, if we've all had tests like that, we're just like, shut up. So accessibility, this is a really cool one. It helps you sort of audit your components and figure out how accessible they are, and it gives you sort of, I don't know quite how smart it is, but it gives you recommendations on how to make your components more accessible. They have other stuff. You can link stories together. You can get more complicated with it. There was one that I saw that was really cool where they used, some guy at my talk was like, we use it for screenshots. And it was visual regression testing. So we'll literally take like a screenshot JPEG and that you can have someone check to make sure that like, oh my God, it didn't turn blue or now it's off the screen or it's not even rendering or whatever. Cool. And then we just roll through every single one of these. Oh, I forgot this one. This is a really neat idea. They just released a blog post that they're coming out with this new concept, and so it's hard to describe because I kind of barely have a grasp on it, but it's this thing that like if a story is this like source of truth for a component, and it's like cool, if a component can be blue, it can be red, it can be green, each of those things is like a story, right? And so they said like, if I'm testing that, and so in my regular tests, I'm trying to test that I can make it blue, I can make it green, I can make it red. They're trying to come out with this thing where they become a source of truth for like a component, and so you can basically export a story and then pass those directly off to tests, so you don't end up having to just create the same state twice, right? Because in your test you'd have to go, okay, here's a component, I make it blue now, and then I test that it's blue, versus I'm in Storybook and I make it blue so I can see that it's blue. You can just kind of do that once and then just test that it does the things that it's supposed to do. It also lets you do custom theming. I don't know much about it, I put it in here. Mostly as filler. But if you were to like build and host your own Storybook instance, like you could make it blue or company colored or whatever you wanted. And then, yeah, those are the rest of the ones I didn't really get into. They also have it's an open API, it's community, it's open source, so you can build any plugin you want. They have a shit ton. Here's some things I don't like about Storybook. I find it to be a pain in the ass to set up. So, shocking truth time, I'm more of a backend engineer, so I do full stack, and so I didn't set up Webpack. I barely deal with Webpack on a daily basis. I find Webpack to be excruciating. So when I was first writing this talk, I started writing my own repo, and I was like, I'm going to be so cool, and I'm going to be like, hey, look, that guy spent like hours and hours and hours writing code, and he cares a lot. And then I don't. So I started and I immediately ran into like Webpack is not doing what I want it to do, and I was like, yeah, I'm not freaking doing this. Like I have a whole thing that my company built, I'm just going to use that. I've noticed that it gets a little funky sometimes with the hot reloading, so it doesn't always show up. And I definitely, when I did this talk at Develop Denver, I was like pushing the buttons and I was like, look, the button's green and now the button's blue, and it just stayed green. And I was like, no! So, and the other thing too is it takes a really long time to spin up. So I spun it up locally just to show you so you can see the numbers, but it took almost 3 minutes to build our Storybook. So, yeah, gross. But you only, whatever, do it in the middle, do it at the beginning of the day, and then it's just kind of up and running, right? And so anytime you get into a weird component state, you can just refresh, and it usually fixes itself. But yeah, that part sucks. See here is more official, and I was like, there are trade-offs and whatever, but no, it's just a pain in the ass sometimes. Cool. Just a quick recap. Talked about the history, talked about some of the value props of Storybook, and then, I'll show you some more examples. So we looked at some of these in code, but so that's sort of ICD code picker for the billing codes. This is what the story looks like. Not too bad, right? What's interesting about this is we use like recompose, and so we're passing a lot of our like data in as props, and so we have to use like Apollo has things you can use to like fake some of that data, but that's probably like the worst part about mocking data for this stuff. Otherwise, it's not too bad. And then all you do is just like render a component. So if you want to look at what a knob would look like, they sort of look like this. So you literally like pull out this like is error just from this Boolean story add-on knob, and then you just pass it like its default state, and then you pass those directly in as props, basically. So, yeah, not too bad. This one's like, that one's not too bad either. I thought it was going to be more complicated. Cool. All right. It's awesome. Sweet. So, that's the gist. I didn't say anything earlier because I knew I was going to be up here and you have to listen to me, and we're hiring too. I don't even remember. Senior devs, principal engineer, data engineer. We got a lot of other soft positions like account managers and salespeople and stuff like that. We raised a Series B a little while ago. But yeah, that's the gist of the talk. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody have questions for Derik? Yeah, do we?